Hello again, everybody. Troy Turbyville back with another edition of Ville on the Ville here on my YouTube channel. I just want to take a quick time here at the beginning to thank everybody who tuned in last week. To be quite honest, a few more tuned in than I thought would, as I got that test broadcast out there initially. I appreciate the feedback as well. A lot of people gave me some feedback on Twitter and on my YouTube channel, a couple of notes and comments. So anything that I can get from you, I greatly appreciate it. Anybody who enjoyed it, I'm glad you did. And from here moving forward, hopefully I can improve on it, get better, provide more content that you will enjoy, and we'll move from here. Like I said, why am I doing this? I can't really get into it. I'll just say it's a project that I'm working on, and hopefully it will develop as we move forward and I kind of get my feet wet here on my YouTube channel. So thanks again for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. There's plenty to talk about. The men just scraped by last night against Albany. In that game, you know, it went from 0 to 60 real quick there at the end. The Cardinals had what felt like a somewhat comfortable lead, up double digits there about midway through the second half, and then just hit one of those droughts that they've hit more often than not, it seems like, especially against the lesser competition. But they were able to make plays late. We'll get more into that a little bit later. Talk about the women's team. Fantastic showing in Lexington. They followed that up with another win on the road yesterday in a matinee game out west as they defeated Air Force in Colorado Springs. Not the prettiest of games, but a win is a win, and they were shorthanded as well. So heading into the Christmas holiday as they take a break, still undefeated are the ladies. Also, we'll briefly touch on the early national signing day that kicked off yesterday, and we'll go through tomorrow on Friday. Talk about the signings Louisville had briefly, show you those. I'm a guy, I'm going to tell you right now, I follow recruiting loosely, but I'm not a guy who dives really deep into it because I'm more concerned about the guys once they get here. My focus wants to be on coverage of that and what they do once they arrive at Louisville. But I know there are a lot of people out there who really follow recruiting closely, and there are also a lot of people out there who cover it very well. So I'm not going to even begin to think that I can cover that any better than those guys. So if you're into the recruiting thing, you already know where to go for that kind of stuff. So I will, let you do that. But I will touch on it briefly, kind of give you some opinions, especially on what I think about this new signing period. It's somewhat interesting. Some coaches feel one way, some another, and usually that's based on the program status and what kind of program they have. We'll finish up this week talking about the appeal. Didn't really get into that last week. Louisville wrapped up their final appeal in front of the NCAA Appeals Committee last week. Kind of give you my opinions on what I think will happen, what I think should happen. Those things are different, obviously, as you might imagine. And then we'll wrap it up at the end by touching on what's to come. Next week, a big week, so we'll get on that. But what I want to do here at the beginning is kind of talk about me. Who am I? Again, my name is Troy Turbyville. I go way back with Louisville sports to the golden age of the Denny Crum era, if you will. I was fortunate enough to consciously remember a lot of the good times in the 80s. Now, unfortunately, I was told I watched the 1980 championship, but I was just barely 6 years old at the time, so I don't really remember that. My first conscious memories of Louisville, being a Louisville fan, actually came in 1982 when Louisville made that run to the Final Four in New Orleans. 1982, we took a little trip along with Colonel Denny down the mighty Mississippi. Mickey Gilley, the sweet tune of Mickey Gilley, the Battle of New Orleans. That's one of the things I remember as a kid, and maybe that's the reason I hold on to those memories from 1982, was that song, The Battle of New Orleans, that preceded the Cardinal Cannonball in 1983. But that was the season I really became a Louisville fan, and I wasn't raised in one of those families that were just over-the-top fanatic Louisville fans. My dad liked Louisville basketball and the style Denny Crum had, and I guess secondarily I got into it because of that. That drew me in, became a fan, and really started following them. The sickness began early, as it does for most of us, and I remember that 1982 season, losing to Georgetown in the Final Four. 1983 obviously was very exciting. Got to the Final Four again and did that via defeating Kentucky in the original Dream game. I'll never forget that. The overtime period, I remember freaking out as Kentucky made that game close down the stretch and then taking control in overtime and just absolutely dominating the Wildcats in overtime where they almost didn't score. down the stretch, you're going to see me tossing stuff randomly. That's my dog. I have to like throw him treats so he doesn't like interrupt the show and start talking. Although he does have some solid takes, so maybe every now and then he'll chime in when I'm struggling, maybe with my voice, because it's that time of year. The voice comes and goes. I may have to take a sip of water every now and then. But again, I followed Louisville through the 80s, and it was great. I mean, the Final Four in 83, 82 and 83, the championship in 86, and then you hit that chasm from the late 80s through the 90s, and I feel for the fans who came up in the 90s and really did not experience the things that I got to in the 80s. It was a rough go of it. There were a few good years, obviously, the 1997 run to the Elite Eight, and how crazy is it to think that 1997 year, I remember thinking, wow, they got to the Elite Eight. When I was a kid, it seems like that was almost the norm every year, let alone going to the Final Four. And then we had that space between 86 and 2005 where they didn't make a Final Four, and that one Elite Eight in 97, just to me at the time, it seemed like such a great run. And now here recently, there's been so many great runs to the Elite Eight, it again became the norm that we all got used to. And unfortunately, some other things have happened here that kind of takes away from that, but still, I'm not going to let those things make me feel like that's the reason they accomplished what they did. We know that's not the case. And again, the whole appeals thing we'll get into later. But I was a student at U of L in the 90s. So while I was a student, they did, that was that period where they weren't all that great. They didn't hit really rock bottom again until maybe a little bit later in the 90s after I had left. But that's my history with Louisville. It goes way back, and I feel very fortunate to have experienced that really most of that good era in the 80s, and then also this resurgence here as of late as they have again returned to Final Fours and championships. So that's kind of a little bit on me, who I am, and what I bring to the table. I do have a background. I was fortunate enough to be able to cover Louisville as a photographer and videographer for several years in the 2000s. You've probably seen on Twitter, I've sent out pictures and some video clips. I'm going to share one I did here just yesterday, and I've shared it in the past. A great shot I got of Elvis Dumerville back from 2005. Was able to rekindle that video thanks to the recruiting signings yesterday, and I'll show that again here in just a sec. But I also work in media right now, so I have experience with production and video and photography and editing. And as you've seen, if you've come to my YouTube channel, I've done videos for going back as many as 10 years. So all those things combined, being a fan, the experience I have in different sorts of media is why I'm kind of getting into this. And like I said, hopefully this is going to develop into something a little more special, a little more fun, and a little more in-depth. And we'll go into that as we move forward, hopefully down the road here over the coming months ahead as the Cardinal basketball season rolls on. And, of course, football season wraps up here next week. Now I want to jump into the basketball games from the past week for the men and women. We'll start with the gentlemen as they went into Madison Square Garden last weekend, got the win over Memphis. That game, I don't think it concerned many people. But my only fear, and I touched on it last week, was that Memphis, they weren't totally devoid of talent. You knew they had some decent athletes on their team, and that's why they had a decent record despite not playing a tough schedule. They're still able to beat the teams that they should beat. And my fear was that Memphis was going to circle that game on the calendar with Louisville because that was probably one of, if not the biggest game they had on the schedule. So you were going to get their best shot, just like you get from these lesser teams. But Memphis is probably a notch above, most of these mid-major squads that Louisville faces. So you were going to get a good shot from them, and I think Louisville did for the most part. But despite that, early on, shot the ball really well. I think that was through motion. Jeff Greer had a great article. You've probably seen it in the Courier Journal or online, how Greg Paulus had looked into spacing, working on spacing, and through that helping the team get better shots. And we know this team can shoot the ball, and I think that was a key in that game. If this team gets good shots, they're more than not going to go in, and I think we saw that against Memphis because they did space the ball pretty well. There were a couple times where they had some droughts, and I think when you see those droughts, it comes down mostly to when guys decide they want to break down and try to go one-on-one. And I've touched on that too, I believe, briefly last week. This is not a team that's not the strong suit. Every now and then Snyder can get you one-on-one and get a mismatch. But guys like VJ and Daniel, that's not their strong suit. They're not guys who are really good off the dribble. Their handle's not all that great. So when they try to really drive into traffic, make a move, they can struggle. So I think when they start to get into that, I think that's when those droughts happen. Now, every now and then your shots just aren't going to fall. But I think the key is what Paul has found: move the ball, space, move without it, get good passes to guys ready to shoot, and then the shots are going to fall. And I think that's what we saw against Memphis. But what I really liked about it was when Memphis made a run, they did answer and then pushed it back out, especially in the second half. They got a lead, and they led like 55-42, and I even tweeted out, okay, at this point, let's see how things go. Are we going to hit a drought? And they did for a spell. Memphis cut it to 4 points, but then Louisville was able to really batten down, make plays, and just push it right back out, back up to a 13-point lead. And from that point on, I believe with about 8 minutes to go, it was really not in doubt at that point. So as I tweeted out, it was winning time. Let's see what they do. And they made plays. And they were able to get the ball in the guy's hands to make those plays. Anas Mahmoud was, again, a force blocking shots. He did pretty good rebounding in that game. Now, in the Albany game here last night, we'll get into here in just a second, not so much the case. But Ray Spalding also was able to make plays and come up big. When you break it down against Memphis, Spalding, my voice is already giving out. 9 rebounds from Ray Spalding, which I really like to see. And then again, I mentioned the blocks, 7 blocks from Anas Mahmoud. And the rebounding is where Anas struggled against Memphis. And it's interesting because it seems from game to game, one guy just disappears on the backboards and another guy might step up. But what they really need is consistency. I would rather see 2 guys get 4 rebounds than one guy get 8 and one guy get none or 1. But that's kind of what we've seen these last couple games. But down the stretch, Louisville made the plays they had to win, got the win over the Memphis team that everybody expected them to do. And so they moved at that point to 8-2. And then came Albany last night. The late tip-off, I think a lot of people knew Albany was going to be a pretty good mid-major team coming in here. They had a decent 11-2 record. Their only losses were on the road against decent competition at Monmouth and Memphis. But I still think most people thought it was not going to be as concerning as it got late. And it really, early on, they came out, they seemed to execute pretty well, and they really never were threatened by Albany for much of the first half. About midway through the first half, it got a little stagnant. Ryan McMahon came in, hit 2 3-pointers, and that really kind of jump-started the Cards. They pushed it out to double digits. I think it got up to 12 points. And then from that point, they kind of coasted into the half, had a 7-point lead. And the second half kind of started the same way, kind of got into a little bit of a rut. I think they were up like 43-35, and you felt like, okay, this is where they need to push it out and put some distance between them and Albany, but they hit a drought, and I think they got into one of those situations where guys were, again, trying to go one-on-one, a lot of dribbling, and again, that's just not what this team does well. Guys need to space, need to kick, and they're always going to do better if they're ready to catch the ball and shoot versus trying to make a move off the dribble. And I think we got into that. So you had a period of 4 or 5 minutes where nobody was scoring. They led by, I think the score was 43-35 for 2 or 3 minutes. And then finally, Albany had a couple baskets. And just like that, it was a 4-point game. And you started to be like, okay, let's see, are they going to answer? Padgett called a timeout, and then they were able to drop a play, got McMahon a 3. He hits it. They answer with, they come right back. Quentin Snyder hits a 3, and just like that, it's back to 10. And they kept that margin comfortably at that 9, 10, 11 mark for a few minutes. And that's where I think everybody thought, okay, I think we're going to be okay. I think we're going to get home with the win here. And then it happened again. They got into another one of those droughts, and I think they kind of tightened up. And Albany went on a run towards the from about the 9-minute mark of the second half to about the 3-minute mark. I think overall it was like I believe I have the notes here. It was a 65-62 Louisville trailed, so a 17-3 run. Louisville only scored 3 points over about a 7-minute span. And at that point, I think everybody pretty much was worried that that they weren't going to even win the game. But what was good to see, this is a young team, and as I'll summarize here as I finish up talking about them, you need to see them make plays and build confidence when it gets to, to gut check time, and that's what they did against Albany. Albany, hit them with that run, and this is a young team, young coaching staff. You were concerned, are they going to be able to make the plays to get the job done? David Pageant draws some plays up for Ray Spalding, who really didn't score a whole lot. He only had 3 points leading up to that point, but they went to him, got an assist from Q, scored, came right back on the post, isolated him again. And I'll be honest, I was not that comfortable because Ray's another one of those guys, not a great handle. So in the post, now he needs to work on it, and apparently he has. Made a good move, threw up the right-handed baby hook, was able to put Louisville back in front as Albany then went on a little bit of a drought, and the Cards were able to get back in front. And then they got the ball back, and out of a timeout, drew up a great play. Ryan McMahon hits a three. They actually ran the back cut, looking for the alley-oop. It was covered. Then they ran McMahon off the screen on the other side, and he caught and shot and buried the three. And at that point, it looked like they were home free because there was about 30 seconds left. 4-point lead, got free throws. And then they tightened up. The one thing that this team has done so well all year is shoot free throws. The worst they've shot in a game leading up until last night was 69% in the opener. And they hadn't been below 70 all season until last night. But you saw Honest miss a few. You saw VJ go the line, miss two. Then you had Darius Perry go to the line, made the first, but then missed the second. And that led up to the very end when you had Albany with a shot to tie or win. And at the buzzer, basically got the shot off. A little controversy at the end when it looked like there was some contact. Now, I've heard from some people that were at the game, the reviews, the officials said that they didn't feel he fouled him. But, I mean, it looked to me that there was some contact. But I'll be honest, there was contact on several shots that wasn't called. So leading up to that, I'm not really concerned about Louisville, getting a homer call because, as I tweeted out, Louisville doesn't seem to get a lot of those at home very often, as much as at least some other programs do. So I'm not going to lose sleep over that non-call down the stretch. So got the job done this week, 2 wins, and you saw the team develop and make plays when they had to get the win. And what I really want everybody to do as a Louisville fan is to be patient with this team because as young as they are, this team, I really don't feel like, and I tweeted this out last night as well, I don't know if this team, we're going to know what they are for possibly, another month or if not longer. We could be talking about midway through the conference schedule before we really have a sound, look at what this team is going to be. I think at this point, usually when you get into conference play, you know what you're going to expect from a team. Okay, they're going to give you this. They can provide, they're a great shooting team. They're really good in the half court. Their defense is locked down when it has to be. Well, this team, the coaching staff and a lot of these players as well, even if the players aren't new, okay, the newness of everything else, it's almost like they're starting over. Like I said last week, Quentin Snyder, losing Patino when he did, I mean, that's the guy who brought him in, was the coach that had schooled him for 3 years, and to have all that ripped out at the last second, you're starting fresh. And then you've got David Pageant starting fresh. Greg Paulus coming in, learning this team, these players. There's just so much newness that I really hope as fans we all can say, look, we're still going to get stressed out from game to game, from play to play, but to really be level-headed and not try to get bent out of shape. This team's going to lose games. They simply are. And against some teams you don't expect them to possibly. But you never know what this team can be capable of until we get to, like I said, I think February 1st is kind of the date I'm kind of loosely penciling in on my calendar. Let's see where we are on February 1st because at that point they're going to have experienced a lot of play in the ACC, especially on the road against some tough teams and tough environments. And let's see how they grow. Let's see how they develop and go from there. But moving forward, next up this weekend, Grand Canyon comes to town. Keontae Vernon is going to bring his antelopes or lopes or whatever they prefer to be called. Dan Marley brings the antelopes into town. And they're a pretty good team. I mean, I don't know where they would rank up with like your Albanys and these other teams that Louisville has played. But we saw last year, now that's a tough environment to play in, and they took Louisville to the wire. So it will be interesting to see. It's just another one of those games that you would expect Louisville to take care of business. But will they, again, get into a situation where they go through one of those droughts? Are they starting to try and go more one-on-one? Or are they still going to get back to spacing, passing? That's what I want to see moving forward. That was that emphasis that Greg Paulus brought in on motion and passing. And I think if this team can really focus on doing that consistently, that's when they're going to be really good. But again, that's going to take time. Playing together, knowing where guys are going to be, over time it becomes instinctive. And you see that. The surprising thing is Ryan McMahon, and I think this has more to do with the fact that he's just comfortable with what they're running. He comes in, like he came in against Albany, and right away was able to run that alley-oop to Mahmoud, who was able to kind of pitch it back over his head. A little uglier than it probably needed to be. But it was just right out of the gate. He came in and boom, made the play. So over time, you want to see that happen with everybody. And these freshmen who come in, I do want to give a huge shout out to Dwayne Sutton, who came in 9 rebounds. Didn't score a point, but 9 rebounds in 21 minutes of play. And that's what this team needs. As I noted on the banner, yikes on the rebounds. That's outside of motion on offense, the rebounding on the defensive end is paramount for this team. And I think, I tweeted this out as well. Great shot blocking. Honest has been dominant blocking shots, but I think he is so focused on blocking shots that the rebounding has become something that he's not able to do. Now, sometimes that's the fact that he's the eraser. He's the shot blocker, so other guys need to focus on rebounding. And so I think at times this team, because they're so long, guys like Ray Spalding and Malik Williams as well, at times they get so focused on blocking shots that guys just don't really look to rebound. And I think they really need to have the mindset, especially guys like Ray, Malik Williams when he's in there, Dang Adele. Got to get more out of them on the rebounding aspect of things. So maybe it goes down to saying, hey, Honest, when you're in there, you're our shot blocker. I want you to be the guy who challenges shots when you're in the post. And everybody else, you need to focus on rebounding. Don't worry about blocking the shot. If they're able to score over Honest, that's fine. But if they miss, we need somebody to be able to rebound the basketball, because so often, even off loose balls, the other team just seems to get to the ball quicker because Louisville has been so aggressive at trying to stop that initial penetration, the initial shot, that they aren't able to gather the ball if they get a stop. And the next thing you know, the other team gets a second chance point or another shot clock. And so they really need to have guys, collectively. If you don't have one guy who's a great rebounder, or if you're just not rebounding well as a team, it's got to be a collective effort. So, like I said, maybe it goes down to just assigning, okay, who's the shot blocker? Everybody else is going to be the rebounder. Maybe just have Dwayne Sutton, Jordan Nwora as well. When he's in there, those two guys, Sutton and Nwora, just seem to have a knack for rebounding. I mean, Luke Whitehead back in the day had it. Certain guys are just really good at positioning. Now, Sutton in particular, not a really tall guy, but he's got the physique where he can clear guys out. And so maybe it's a combination of that and just the instinctive nature that he knows where to be and how to position himself. But they need guys to focus and do those things as well on rebounding. So I think maybe it comes down to just, hey, let's not be so aggressive on blocking shots outside of Honest. Let's just focus on rebounding, because we cannot let a team like Albany, who, granted, they out-rebounded every team they've played this year. But again, when you're talking about a team that you had that significant a height advantage over, you've got to be able to at least hold your own on the boards. And they were absolutely dominated. And most of those on the offensive end for Albany, I think they had a plus 14 advantage on offensive rebounds. And that is just huge when you talk about getting second chances. And that's the only reason they were in the game. If Louisville could have just done, had 5 or 6 more defensive rebounds, that game doesn't come down to that point. So rebounding, the two issues this team has: offensively, motion and passing; defensively, crashing the boards and rebounding when you get a miss, when you force a miss. They do those two things over the next month. That's how this team is going to be as good as it can possibly be. And one last thing I want to touch on with Quentin Snyder. I noted I had said last week that hopefully getting to Madison Square Garden, getting away from Louisville, maybe he would break out. Scoring, he certainly has done that. The shot has been great. He's had 19 points the past 2 games. Now, he did have a few sloppy turnovers in the first half against Memphis, but didn't have any in the second, and didn't have any last night against Albany. So that is also a paramount part of this team becoming the best team they can be. Because like I said last week, this team is – Quentin Snyder's the leader, unquestioned. They're going to go as far as he takes them. So it's good to see those turnovers are going away. The scoring is going up. Had some great moves where he was able to just go at a guy, make a spin move, and score. I know some people thought the block call in the second half should have been a charge. I disagree. I don't think there was really a lot of contact when Snyder spun. I think the guy tried to slide over and make it look like there was contact, fell down, and then he actually tripped Snyder. So that was the call. It wasn't really a block charge so much as it was a feet tangled up issue where that foul was called. So Snyder doing a good job of taking care of the ball, scoring, knocking down shots when he's open. And also I want to give a shout out to Ryan McMahon. I mean, he is becoming, last week I noted how I think a lot of us were surprised and really didn't think about what a steady hand he would provide offensively, not just scoring, but running the offense. He's looked fantastic, and he continues to do that. Like I said earlier, he came in right away and boom, ran the cut, the alley-oop to Honest for a basket. And, of course, his shot, I mean, he doesn't hesitate anymore. I mean, he gets the ball and he's firing quick. Missed a few, but then knocked down some timely shots. In the first half, like I said, he had 2 that kind of sparked him to push the lead out. Then he hit a shot when Louisville had gone through a drought. And then, of course, at the end, they drew the play up for him. And he was, he answered the call, didn't hesitate, knocked it down to give him a 4-point advantage and really provided that difference late. Had they just hit a couple free throws, it would have been over at that point. But not really concerned about the free throws. You're going to have a game. I mean, they still weren't awful. I think that the only real slight concern would be the timing. You'd think maybe they got a little tight thinking about, we're in a close game, got to knock these down. And some guys threw up some shots and missed it. But moving forward, up next is Grand Canyon. We'll see how they do. And then, of course, after that, is there some other game against some other team from the state of Kentucky. We'll get into more of that next week. Next up, I want to talk about the ladies. Jeff Walls and the ladies went into Lexington last weekend, and that was a game who I noted when I talked about it last week. It was kind of a, see where they stand game. They clearly were better on paper, as they have been several times over the past several years against Kentucky, but for whatever reason, they had struggled against the Wildcats, even though, again, on paper, even the line, they were favored to win. They were expected to win. Last year, they barely won. It took overtime. And the 5 years leading up to that, they lost. So we had seen them be utterly dominant against the lesser teams that you expected them to be dominant against. They had beaten some really good teams like Ohio State and others. And it was at this point, okay, this is going to show us what this team is really made of. Going into Lexington, hostile environment. This is the game where in the past, even though they were considered to be the better team, they struggled against the Wildcats. And they went in and right from the get-go, got the lead early, kind of went back and forth for a bit, but the second quarter, they absolutely dropped the hammer and never looked back. I think they had a 22-point lead going into the half after that dominant second quarter. I think which Kentucky only scored 7 points, and they really blew things open. And when they pushed it out to about a 15-point lead, I thought, well, let's see how things go from here, because several times during that losing streak to Kentucky, they had a double-digit lead, but then as the game progressed, they just couldn't push or maintain that lead or push it out even farther, and Kentucky reeled them in and then caught them at the finish line. No case here. They got the lead, and they just kept pushing it out, and I think it got beyond 30 at one point. Really, it never became a game after the half, which was great to see, and that's what you expect from a team that should be dominant like this. And they did so. Asia Durr was fantastic, 32 points. Mahisha Hines-Allen, 18 points. You got production from just about everybody, and that's what this team brings from top to bottom. Jeff Walls has noted from, this year they've got a team where they can bring, players off the bench that they don't drop the production all that much. They're able to maintain, and that's the difference between the truly elite programs in women's basketball and really any level, really, if you think about it. You get that good production off the bench, and there isn't drop-off. And that's what they've been able to get as they just dominated the Wildcats to the tune of 87-63. 5 players in double figures, led by, as I already noted, Asia Dor's 32 and Hines Allen's 18. And they just simply looked dominant as they moved to 13-0. And then yesterday afternoon, took on Air Force out in Colorado Springs. They got the win. It wasn't pretty. I don't think Jeff Walz was all that pleased with how things went. Now, they were quite shorthanded without 2 starters. Erica Carter and Asia Dur both didn't play. So when you're without your leading scorer, I mean, the one who just dropped 32 points against your arch rival, and who had 47 earlier this year against top 5 Ohio State, you're going to be behind the 8 ball a little bit. But against a winless team in Air Force, I'm sure that they really didn't think Jeff Walz probably wasn't all that concerned. Didn't feel like it was going to be all that much of a loss if they didn't have those players. So precautionary, they hold outdoor. Erica Carter also didn't play. Said her foot was in a boot. Not sure exactly what the injury was. But nonetheless, started off a little slow, but after the first media timeout, went on a 14-0 run, and pretty much that was it. From that point on, Air Force just didn't have the firepower to really get back into the game. They hit a few threes. But really, it seemed to me Louisville, with being shorthanded and without, in particular, Dorr able to knock down shots like she does, it looked like they focused on getting the ball in the interior. Only took 8 3-pointers, didn't make a single one. Shot 22 of 25 from the free throw line, which again would indicate they were getting the ball, focused more on getting the ball into the post, scoring low. Got some transition baskets as well, but kind of a sloppy game. Never really in doubt, but also never really, they didn't really lay the hammer down like they did on the Wildcats outside of that 14-0 run early. But that's really all they needed. And they break for the holidays at 14-0 and, looking good heading into conference play. And now it gets real as far as what you're going to see moving forward. And I think at this point it becomes, they've got probably the 2 of what you would consider number 1 seed teams left on the schedule, because they play, obviously, Notre Dame in conference. And I'd semi-forgotten until me and a friend were talking. They had that game at UConn come February. So that's going to I had noted how the Kentucky game was going to tell us where they stood. Well, that game at UConn is definitely going to show us where they stand later this season as they go up and take on the perennial power, Oriana and company, up in Connecticut. And it'll be interesting to see, because if they can, don't expect them to win that game, but if they just make a good showing, I think at that point, if they can just get through the conference with a decent record, if they can finish top 2 in the conference, them and Notre Dame. North Carolina also usually a very good team. But if they can finish top 2 in conference, make a good showing for themselves against UConn, hopefully that keeps them out of UConn's region. Because if they see, if Louisville takes UConn to the wire, maybe they win. I think that then keeps them away from UConn in the same region, because that's what you don't want. You want to get a 1 seed, or at least put yourself in a position to where they say, let's not put that team in UConn's region, because we want to give UConn, I guess, the easiest path. Of course, year to year, it really doesn't matter, it seems like, anymore for the Huskies. But it's going to be an important game, just like I said, a measuring stick, but also to position them for the postseason. But the ladies look great. As far as being 14-0, that's as good a start as I can recall in the Jeff Walz era. I haven't researched it in depth, but I would have to say it's probably, I don't know if they've hit the break, the holiday break before conference undefeated. If they have, it hasn't been often. So they've gotten themselves off to a fantastic start, Jeff Walz and the Lady Cards at 14-0. Now, as I noted earlier, yesterday, for the first time, college football had the early signing period, and they signed 20 players in the early signing period on Wednesday, yesterday. And like I said, I'm not a guy who's really dives deep into the recruiting. I want to focus more on once they get here. So now that these names are on the dotted line, I'm going to start looking into what they provide, what they're going to bring to the table. But from what I have read, it's been considered very successful, a lot of speed. I think they've also brought in a lot of guys on the defensive side of the ball who can take up space. One name in particular here I'll get to in a second. But I think some are already saying this could be Bobby Petrino's best class. I've heard of his second era at Louisville, but it's possible it could be his best class, and I would probably say it is, even including his first era, because I think now you have the ACC affiliation, and the Titans go with that, and of course Lamar Jackson Heisman effect. So this class, and it's still not done. The early signing period actually goes through tomorrow. It's 3 days, so I don't know if they're going to sign any more. They possibly could, but of course then in February you have the final signing, what used to be the big signing day, as they might sign some more. So they still have some spots that they could and probably will sign some guys as they continue forward. But just running through the names, here they are. I'm not going to read them to you. A lot of guys out of Florida. I think one of the names that people are the most excited about, Trinell Troutman, out of Miami, Florida, as well as you'll see at the bottom there, Dejmi, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, Dejmi Dumerville-Jean. Dumerville, obviously a name that we know around here, and yes, there is a relationship there. He is the nephew of former great Elvis Dumerville, who played at Louisville for Petrino back in the early to mid-2000s and was one of the best players along the defensive side of the ball that Louisville has seen in quite some time. And Elvis, hopefully this Dumerville will provide plays like this one. And here's that clip that anytime I can show this clip, I'm going to do it. This is Elvis Dumerville just absolutely face planting. Well, not face planting, but stiff arming and planting Fatu Turi into the turf at Commonwealth, now Kroger Field, back in 2005 when the Cardinals defeated the Wildcats. And after that game, Elvis, it was wasn't the best game. He only had 6 sacks, including a strip sack where he picked this ball up and then embarrassed Turi by planting him in the ground. After that game, Turi said, yeah, he's okay. We missed assignments. I don't know how good he is, but, he's not all that good. We just missed assignments. But how anybody can make that statement after being put down like that, I mean, even if that was the only play Dumerville made in the entire game, I mean, come on, you're going to say something like that. But hopefully we'll see some more plays from the new Dumerville. I remember back in the spring, I saw him. I think he verbally committed, and I saw it, and I'm like, oh, I like seeing that. Hopefully we'll get some play like that that his uncle brought to the table out of the nephew when he comes in. But if you remember Elvis, of course, he's still getting it done in the NFL. He was a guy who used athleticism and speed and that unique physique he had, long arms, and was able to get around guys and had a great reach. His nephew, 6'5", about 350. So he's not going to be a speed edge guy. He's going to clog up the middle. So a little bit different as far as the body style and the physique for him. But some of these other signees, here they are. Tutu Atwell, you'll notice there at the bottom, Miami Northwestern. He just led them to a state championship. I believe was named MVP as well. He was actually a dual threat quarterback. Now, if you look at his listing there, he's coming in as a wide receiver, and you can see why at only 5'9", 155, not really a guy you can bring in to say he's going to be the next Lamar Jackson just because he doesn't have the physical size to play that position at the collegiate level. But what he does bring is the ability to be a guy who can be your next Harry Douglas or the role that Trevion Samuel is filling right now, a guy who can run a reverse, get that pass over the middle, and make a big play. So that's a name that people want to keep an eye on moving forward. Jarrett Jackson, also defensive end. You'll get the size there, 6'6", 275. So not a huge guy in terms of weight, but in terms of height and what he can do along the line defensively. You see a lot of defensive line guys here, and that was going to be a need for Louisville. So it's good to see that they're plugging those in. They're taking care of areas that they're going to have to have guys come in and play. And from what I've heard, a lot of these guys are going to be able to sign early, and that is huge when you can get guys in, sign early, get in here for spring ball, because that allows them to have an opportunity to play earlier in their freshman year if they're guys you feel like are going to play right away. Whereas if they didn't come in until the fall, they're behind the 8 ball as far as learning the system, conditioning even in some cases, and really getting acclimated to the college game because it is such a huge jump, especially guys along the defensive line. So I'm not sure how many of the defensive line guys are possible early enrollees, but the more the better as far as allowing to establish depth, guys who can come in early and play. So we will see. But like I said, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the recruiting. You know where to find it. There's guys all over the place out there who do a fantastic job covering you and really giving you specifics, highlights, breaking down the film of these guys. So if you haven't already, I welcome you to go to those sites. You've got Rivals, 247, Scout. Even Louisville's Go Card site has nice little bios on these athletes, what they've done in college, what they've accomplished, and kind of what they look to do in college. Very interesting. I think it was, if I recall, was it Tutu Atwell? I think he was interested in coming in and doing graphic design and architecture, which I think is really cool. You just don't see that a lot from some of these guys that come in. They're focused on football, and maybe they're not. But that's a deep major. But of course, at Louisville with the engineering school, is certainly a great avenue for him to go into. So I thought that was kind of a neat. But that's the little things that U of L has up on their website. If there's an academic side of things that guys really want to focus on, they've noted. So that's a kind of a brief look at signing day. Like I said, will they sign any more in this over the rest of today and tomorrow? I'm not really sure. Of course, keep posted online, Twitter. Guys are sending out updates constantly on that. But the one question I did have with signing day, now there's almost like two separate events versus where you used to have the big national signing day in February, and that was a holiday for the recruiting, the guys who really got into it, both coverage and the fan side of things. I mean, some guys would take off work and just sit there and just couldn't wait to see the names roll in. And now, what does that do? Because so many, you're talking about Louisville signed 20 players already. So now in February, there might be a few more, but it kind of takes the luster out of that. So is it a good thing to have these two separate things? Does it take away from having that great day in February, or is the fact that you can do it now, is this now, the early signing period, going to be a bigger deal over time? I guess that's something we really won't know until we've gone through a few cycles, how this early period affects the late. And I guess it's just going to depend school by school. But coaches differ on what they feel. I know some coaches really liked having that later period because it was away from bowl games. It was away from finals. You could really focus more on recruiting once the bowl games were done and try to get, last-second visits. Now, of course, for the big names, they liked those last-second visits because if they needed to get a guy, they may be able to go and swoop in and steal somebody at the last second, whereas other schools like having the early signing. If you can get them to sign early, you don't have to worry about a school coming in late and scooping it up. And it was interesting. I think the opinion of Petrino and Stoops here for the local schools was different. Stoops was along the lines of, I like the early period. I want to get these guys signed. And Petrino, I kind of would have thought that he would prefer having the ability to lock guys down. But he said, no, his mindset was that I like just having the one period in February. And I guess his rationale was he liked being able to go in after the season officially was done. You get through bowl prep and bowl games, and then you can go back out again and really hit the recruiting trail hard. But nonetheless, even if his opinion was, I liked the late date, they absolutely did a fantastic job this first go-around with this early signing period. So maybe he's going to change his mind based on how this first one went. But I think the biggest impact is the fax machine. What does the fax machine feel about having its one big day now kind of split up? Is that good? Because, fax machines, do they get used for anything other than the National Signing Day anymore? That's kind of the first thing that crossed my mind was, oh, gosh. Do you go from working one big day a year to working 2 days a year? Is that good? Do you get more exposure? Or would you rather just have one day? So I don't know. Maybe this is a good thing for the fax machine because, it gets to spread itself out over a couple days. or maybe it loses some of the attention of having the big signing day. I don't know. So that's just how it goes when you're relegated to a piece of equipment that that only gets used once a year, or now twice a year. Or maybe, no, I guess it's 3 days, so maybe kids send in, maybe it's 4 days now, so who knows. Fax machine's working overtime now moving forward. The next thing I want to touch on is the NCAA appeal. Last week, as I said earlier, Louisville went in and met with the appeals committee. The last time, the in-person last-second appeal to try and get the original decision that was laid down earlier this year over the summer in August. They were basically told that they were going to lose the banner, lose 100-plus victories, Final Four. And at that point, they had to go through the appeals process, and they've gone back and forth. Now, it's been muddied because with all this other FBI stuff that came down, the appeals process sort of got lost. And for a time, I'm like, are they even doing this anymore? Because you're not getting updates. The timeline was totally thrown off because according to the timeline, as of the time the FBI investigation broke on September 26th, at that point, the NCAA should have already come back with their response of Louisville's response to their original ruling. So it should have already been like 3 steps in, and we hadn't heard a word. And then that FBI stuff, I think the 24th of September is when basically the timeline was August, I think 10th is when the ruling came down, or 11th. 30 days after that, Louisville had to file their response. 2 weeks after that, the NCAA had to respond to Louisville's response, and that was September 24th. And then 2 days after that's when the FBI stuff broke, and we hadn't heard a thing. And then at that point, it just kind of was all up in the air and really not talked about. I had tweeted at Eric Crawford and some other people, like, should we have heard something even before this FBI stuff broke? And they had, I think Eric Crawford responded to me and said, I have reached out to Louisville and they've said they haven't heard anything. So whether that was the case or not, I don't know, but kind of went quiet for a while. They met last Wednesday with that appeals committee in person. Now, they retained Chuck Smirt, which I think threw a lot of people, did not sit well with a lot of fans after how things turned out. But I think they really did not have a choice when you talk about not having Patino around anymore, not having Jurich around anymore, who went through all these original meetings with the NCAA and rulings with the NCAA. Chuck Smirt was the only guy that's still around that was around for those. So I think more than anything, they almost didn't have a choice to retain him. I agree that it's not the greatest feeling in the world after what they did with the self-imposed sanctions and self-imposed sitting out of the NCAA tournament. But I really don't think they had a choice. He was there with Postal and Vince Tyree, and they didn't have a lot to say after the meeting other than they felt like it went well and they had a chance to present their side of things. Now, again, my opinion is I really don't have that much hope that the appeal will be upheld, that they will have the banner retained, just because, frankly, I think they're going to make an example out of Louisville. As much grief as they took for the NCAA, North Carolina issue with the academic fraud, when North Carolina basically admitted to academic fraud and then came back and said, no, it really wasn't fraud. We misspoke. And the NCAA just pretty much let it go at that point. They found that loophole, and really, people say they didn't really have a choice. I don't know if that's necessarily the case. I guess it is, that they can't rule on academia. But I do know that they can rule on morality, and they certainly did that to Louisville. And they used that any other issues clause in their bylaws to apply that rule to Louisville. So I don't know why they can't conveniently use that same thing against North Carolina and say, hey, if we feel like you've grossly committed academic fraud for the better part of 2 decades, then we're going to go ahead and apply this any other stuff clause to you all as well. But of course, they didn't do that. And they are doing that to Louisville. Now, I say that I don't think the banner is going to stay up and the appeal is going to get overturned. But I do honestly feel like it should be. And the reason is, if you take the information they presented, they gave the NCAA the information that the athletes deemed ineligible were a part of these striptease shows and not of the prostitution aspect of the whole investigation. They received striptease benefits, if you want to use that term very loosely. And in doing so, those were impermissible benefits that would be deemed violations that would allow them to be reinstated after certain things are done. Now, that was backed up by the fact that one of Louisville's athletes, of course, names are redacted. A lot of people have assumed that it was Mango Mathiang, received some of those benefits and was able to perform community service and did not miss a single game. Okay, so if you've got a guy who receives the same benefits as the athletes who you say were responsible for vacating 100-plus wins, 2 Final Fours, and a national championship, yet he doesn't sit out a game, I fail to see how that makes any sense whatsoever. You've already established that these athletes were able to be reinstated through that benefit. Okay, it doesn't make them permanently ineligible. So I don't understand how you can say that those 3 athletes who received that same benefit and played then wipes out all those records. It just doesn't make any sense. So Louisville came with a very strong argument based on the facts that they presented. Now, again, is that exactly what happened? I don't know. I can only go by the word that they gave in their appeal documents. And it was a strong argument. And if that is what happened, then absolutely that banner should stay up. Now, there should be some vacation of records, without question, because those athletes should be docked maybe 2 or 3 games for the benefit they received of a striptease, whatever value you want to throw on it. I don't know, a couple $100 or so. But again, that's maybe a game. So you take 3 guys, even if you want to say that they've got to sit, you run that separately. Okay, they're not going to say, oh, well, those 3 guys all sat out this game. Well, this guy sits out this game. This guy sits out this game. So maybe it's 8 games. But nonetheless, to take away all those wins, a championship, a Final Four, over what really, if the documentation is accurate, was less than $1,000 in benefits, then that's absurd. It's as simple as that. Now, I have no problem. If the NCAA wants to hammer Louisville for recruiting violations, then absolutely knock scholarships off, restrict their ability to recruit. They deserve that, because the nasty side of this, the repugnant side of this, now I'm not saying the striptease stuff was great, but that is not the illegal activity, okay, that I think the NCAA is really disgusted by in terms of the recruiting side of things, where the prostitution side was actually present. So they have every right to penalize Louisville for recruiting violations. Dock them scholarships, knock down recruiting visits, knock down their ability, hamper their ability to recruit. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But to take that and to spread it out all over the entire situation with the athletes and saying that they were a part of the whole thing. So, okay, they receive striptease benefits, but we're also going to penalize them as if they receive the prostitution benefits, because it's so disgusting and it's so repugnant, and we're so disgusted with you, Louisville, and then we're going to rule based on our special little clause that we're going to knock out all these victories over, $1,000 striptease shows. I think we've seen in other cases schools who have had similar violations of the striptease acts or whatever. They weren't docked years of games and victories, not even close. So, again, that's my opinion. That's how I think it should be done. But unfortunately, I think the NCAA just really feels the need to make an example. They don't want to be considered weak, and they're going to lay the hammer down and keep the hammer down on Louisville. Now, we can hope that the appeals committee was sympathetic, and Louisville argued a strong case. I think it was. And if the facts were what they were, if those were accurate details, then, I think the banner should remain. Of course, some people would say, of course you do, because you're a Louisville fan. But again, going back, if all they received, if all those 3 athletes received or striptease benefits, it's absurd to feel like you need to take away all that off the record. But that's my opinion, and obviously I think most Louisville fans feel the same way. But we'll see. We've got to wait another month or so before we get that word, and then at that point, who knows? Is it going to drag out in the actual court of law? I honestly think it will. I mean, I think if Louisville is told that they have to take the banner down, I think they're going to fight them in court. At least I think that originally was the plan. But now with the new administration, maybe they're just going to say, okay, we're done, and they're going to rip the Band-Aid off and be done with it. And that certainly could happen with Postal and Tyree now in charge. I think originally before the change in leadership that the plan was to maybe go to court. But we shall see moving forward. But I'll wrap it up on those are my opinions on the appeal. What I also now want to talk about is just today. I wasn't going to talk about this, but as I got home and prepared to shoot this episode, yet again, ESPN comes out with another Outside the Lines special interview, this time with Brian Bowen and the University of Louisville. How many times can ESPN tell the same freaking story about the University of Louisville? I haven't watched the interview. I'm not going to watch the interview because you know what? I guarantee you they're going to tell us the same garbage that they've told us for the past 2 months. It's once again ESPN doing all they can to use Louisville's name to drum up ratings. They know it's got Louisville on it. People are going to love it. People love hearing about Louisville these days. Anything with Louisville's name on it. Now, some of this, you make your own bed, you've got to lie in it. I get that. But at the same time, at what point is ESPN going to drop the repetitive garbage every single time they come out with a story? It's the same stuff told in this almost the same way. There's not even originality. Okay, now we're going to interview Brian Bowen. And you know what they're going to tell us? That Rick Pitino was coach too. Really? You don't say. I bet you that there's allegations that Rick Pitino talked to Adidas. Really? You don't say. Wow, that is absolutely breaking news. Let's do another interview. Let's break it again. Hey, guess what? Rick Pitino's coach too. Really? I think I've heard that at least 6 times over the past 2 months, and nothing has changed. It's just the same thing over and over and over. And at what point is ESPN actually going to produce something that's not the same thing? All right, that's my rant on that. A little, obviously you can tell, a little fed up with ESPN and how they're really basically just taking Louisville's name and using it all they can to get all the ratings. They just need to have their special Outside the Lines Louisville edition once a week because they've pretty much turned that show into what's Louisville doing now. Well, they try to make it look like what's Louisville doing now, but it's really just the same garbage they've been talking about over and over and over again. And how can we retell the same story? But nonetheless, we can't seemingly go through a month without Outside the Lines and ESPN coming up with another story about Louisville told the same way as it was before, let alone we've got to hear every announcer at every game tell us the same story as if nobody knows what the story is. But that's the life we choose as Louisville fans in these days, and hopefully we will get through this at some point. But I am going to go ahead and wrap things up now. I want to thank you for listening to my ranting here over the past 30 minutes or so. I can't thank you enough if you've tuned in. Again, let me know on Twitter, hey, Troy, like the show, or hey, how about trying this out? Let me know what you think. And also, I just want to say to everybody out there, Merry Christmas. Going to tune in again. We're going to have another show next week. Welcome to tune in. It will probably be again on Wednesday or Thursday as we head to what's going to be just a slightly big week as we look at the Cardinals and Wildcats facing off in a very unusually timed game on Friday afternoon. And then, of course, over the weekend, next weekend, Lamar Jackson, and most likely his final game as a Louisville Cardinal. And, I guess there's a small chance that he could come back, but probably not. And you can't blame him if he chooses to depart. He has been unbelievable, and to see him play one more time is going to be is going to be something special. Hopefully he will go out, much like Teddy Bridgewater did in a bowl game, with one of his best performances. He deserves that. This team deserves to have a great finish to the season. They really did turn things around. It was almost a 360 from last year. Now, granted, they weren't at the top of the playoff rankings down the stretch like they were a year ago, but it's odd to think that the way we feel now about this team, without a Heisman win, without those playoff rankings, you almost feel better about how we are heading into the postseason as we were last year, coming off the 2 losses and then, of course, another loss to LSU. Obviously, still a big favorite, but we'll see next week. Going to look into this more in depth, previewing the Wildcats and the Cardinals, and also the Cardinals and the Mississippi State Bulldogs, the depleted Bulldogs, short a quarterback and coaching staff that had departed for Florida. So again, I'm going to wrap things up with that. Thank you for tuning in. Merry Christmas to everybody out there. Thanks so much for tuning in to Ville on the Ville, and we'll see you next week as we again get together here and talk about the Cardinals. Go Cards.